What if Mesopotamia had remained united? What if the land between rivers, the cradle of humanity, had never fragmented into endless wars, but instead flourished as an indivisible empire? Imagine a world where the first clay bricks built not only temples and walls, but a civilization capable of holding together against time. A world in which Babylonians, Assyrians, Sumerians, and Akkadians did not devour each other in blood, but marched side by side under a single banner. But here arises the unsettling question: would such unity be a promise of glory or a curse of absolute power? What would have become of humanity if Mesopotamia had dictated history's rules on its own? Prepare yourself, because this journey will rip you away from the history we know and drag you into a universe where nothing is certain and everything is possible. But first, we must look at reality. The real Mesopotamia was born from fertility of the Tigris and Euphrates. There arose writing, the wheel, the first laws, and the first organized armies. But division also flourished there. City against city, kingdom against kingdom, empire against empire, blood against blood. The cycle was always the same: the glorious rise of a city-state, followed by its fall before the ambition of its neighbor. You are in the poor Babylon, Assur, all rose, all fell, and in the end, unity remained nothing but a fragile dream. But what if that dream had not been shattered? What if, instead of endless disputes, there had been an eternal pact, capable of transforming that land into an absolute, immortal power? The destiny of humanity would change forever, and it is precisely this alternate future that we will now explore. But before we dive into this forbidden timeline, if you also want to explore the secrets of what if, subscribe to the channel now. Here, every video is a journey into a parallel universe of history, where nothing is impossible. And remember, what you are about to hear is not just a hypothesis. It is a dark warning of how the world could have been. What if Mesopotamia had remained united? The answer begins now. Imagine that instead of fragmenting, Mesopotamia had found its strength in unity. Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, not as enemies, but as members of the same body. Instead of fences of hatred and walls of fear, there would be roads connecting cities, rivers navigated like veins pulsing with wealth. Cuneiform writing would not be just a record of debts and harvests. It would be the official language of an eternal empire, preserved and passed on without rupture. The first written law, Hammurabi's Code, would not be a relic of the past, but the legal foundation of all humanity. In this world, wars would not devastate fields nor reduce temples to ashes. The strength that in our history was spent on destruction would be channeled into expansion, knowledge, and dominion. Mathematics, astronomy, architecture, all would flourish without the constant fear of the next invasion. But would unity truly mean peace? Or would it simply transform ambition into something even greater? For a united empire, unbreakable and rich in resources, would soon look beyond its borders. Egypt, with its pharaohs and pyramids, would know no rest. Anatolia, with its copper and iron, would become an inevitable target. And the Mediterranean, which in our history saw Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans flourish, might never have had the chance to shine. Humanity would be shaped not by the pluralism of cultures, but by the dominance of just one, a single center of power, radiating into like a shadow over the planet. But no one could have imagined what such unity would bring with it. For when a people believe their law is eternal, and that their gods are the only ones worthy of worship, the price of order may well be the extinction of freedom. And it is here that tension begins to rise like a wall. Because if Mesopotamia had remained united, perhaps the very idea of cultural diversity would never have existed. But what would happen to the rest of the world, crushed beneath this absolute power? That is what we are about to discover in the next part. A united Mesopotamia would not remain confined to the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates. It would not be enough to rule fertile fields and shining cities. An empire like this knows no limits. First, its armies would march westward toward the lands of Syria and the Levant, coastal cities that, in our history, gave rise to the Phoenicians, and the invention of the alphabet will be reduced to obedient provinces. The maritime genius of those peoples, subjugated, used only to strengthen the Mesopotamian fleet. Next, their eyes would fall upon Egypt. The pharaohs, accustomed to ruling as gods, would face an enemy who claimed to be the heir of the very gods of creation. Imagine the pyramids not as symbols of Egyptian sovereignty, but as monuments seized, covered with cuneiform inscriptions. And in the north, the challenge would be even greater. The mountains of Anatolia, rich in minerals, will become the target of Mesopotamian ambition. Iron, which in our timeline empowered the Hittites and later empires, will be under the exclusive control of a single power. Without competition, the technological progress of all humanity would follow only one path, that of Mesopotamia. But such expansion would come at a price. The cultural diversity we know, Greeks, Phoenicians, Hebrews, Persians, will be suffocated before it could ever bloom. The stories, religions, and myths that shape the real world might never exist. One pantheon, one law, one language. And here arises a dilemma. Would a world unified under Mesopotamia have been more organized, or simply more oppressive? Perfect order is often born of tyranny. And when there are no rivals, who dares to set limits on power? As the empire expands, the shadow it casts begins to cover all of human history. And beneath that shadow, a dark revelation approaches. A turning point that would change not just borders, but the very destiny of human spirituality. Because if Mesopotamia had remained united, the world of belief would never have been the same. And that is exactly what we will see in the next part. In the real Mesopotamia, each city had its own protective god. Babylon worshipped Marduk. Uar revered Nana. Assur was sacred to the Assyrians. This spiritual diversity reflected political fragmentation. Each people a pantheon, each city an altar. But in a united empire, that diversity would not survive. Faith would be centralized, forged as a political weapon. Marduk, the god of Babylon, would rise as the absolute lord, eclipsing all others. Prayers once multiple and polyphonic would be transformed into a single voice of submission. Now imagine the impact beyond Mesopotamia's borders. In Egypt, the solar gods would be branded false. In Anatolia, millennia-old cults would be erased. And even the Hebrews, who in our history planted the seed of monotheism, might have been silenced before writing a single line of their scriptures. What would be born then would be a global faith not of freedom, but of obedience. A religious system legitimizing the empire's absolute power, inscribed on clay tablets and proclaimed in ziggurats rising like beacons of domination. Humanity would never know the diversity of myths that fueled our imagination. There would be no Greek epics, no Torah, no Indian philosophy blossoming in parallel. There would be only the truth imposed by Mesopotamia. And here lies the turning point. The first united empire on earth would not only rule over bodies and lands, but also over souls. One empire, one God, one law. But if every path of spirituality had been controlled from the very beginning by a single civilization, how would that have shaped the birth of ideas like freedom, philosophy, and even science? The answer is disturbing, and at the heart of this dilemma, humanity would face its greatest test, because an empire that rules both heaven and earth would soon begin to dream of ruling even the future. And it is this dark future that we will explore in the next part. With religion controlled and borders expanded, a united Mesopotamia would turn its eyes to another frontier, knowledge. Here, writing, mathematics, and astronomy had already been born. But now, with no internal wars to destroy libraries or scatter scholars, that knowledge would multiply without interruption. Clay tablets would become colossal archives, storing centuries of astronomical observations. The movement of the stars would be calculated with a precision never before imagined. The lunar calendar, which in our history-guided harvests and rituals, would evolve into a science of time, used not to mark crops, but to predict eclipses, floods, and even to justify holy wars. Imagine an empire that not only builds walls, but predicts the future of the heavens, that not only governs cities, but dictates the order of the cosmos. The ziggurats would cease to be mere temples. They would become observatories, towers of knowledge and surveillance. But here lies the price. Knowledge, instead of liberating, would be chained to the throne. No study could exist without the blessing of central power. No discovery would serve humanity. Only the empire And this raises a disturbing question. What would the world be like if science had, from the very beginning, been an instrument of domination instead of curiosity? Would progress have accelerated or been crushed under the weight of absolute control? Because while a united Mesopotamia decoded the movement of the stars, other civilizations might never have had the chance to be born. What in our history became Greek philosophy, Egyptian geometry, Indian medicine, all of it might never exist. One single center of knowledge, one single scientific truth. The climax rises before us. An empire that believed it ruled even over time. A people who saw themselves not as part of the universe, but as its master. And when a civilization believes it can dominate even the future, the consequences surpass every human limit. But no one could imagine what was coming next, because the quest for eternal power always awakens forces that even the greatest empires cannot control. And it is precisely those forces that we will face in the next part. No empire is eternal. Even a united empire, one that rules lands, skies, and hearts, carries within itself the seeds of its own ruin. United Mesopotamia had become a colossus. Its armies marched like storms. Its religion silenced rival gods. Its science unraveled the stars. But the higher the wall, the deeper the cracks hidden at its base. The conquered peoples, forced to worship foreign gods, began to whisper in the shadows. Erased traditions do not vanish. They survive in secrets, in hushed chants, in silent rebellions. And the harder the empire tried to crush those voices, the stronger they grew. Within the empire's own heart, another threat arose. Science, once a tool of domination, began to ask dangerous questions. If the stars follow laws no god can change, how divine were the rulers, truly? The same astronomy that had once legitimized the throne now began to undermine it. The empire lived on its promise of eternity. But eternity is a cruel illusion, and the more Mesopotamia saw itself as master time, the more time turned into its enemy. Picture temples raised for everlasting glory, now drowned in popular revolt. Scribes, once loyal servants, hiding forbidden tablets to preserve truths the empire wanted destroyed. Generals no longer marching for the throne's honor, but for the chance to crown themselves kings. The fractures were not only political, they were spiritual, they were philosophical, they were human. The colossus trembled, and across the plains of ancient Mesopotamia, one question echoed. Can any empire truly rule the hearts and minds of all forever? But as the cracks spread, something even more devastating began to stir. For when an empire that believes itself eternal collapses, its fall is not just a political defeat. It is an earthquake, one that threatens to drag all of humanity down with it. And that earthquake is about to erupt in the next part. Every empire believes itself eternal, until the moment it begins to crumble. And when a united Mesopotamia finally broke, the impact was greater than any earthquake. The cities that had obeyed the same throne for centuries were plunged into chaos. Babylon rose against Assur. You are against Nippur. The conquered peoples, suffocated for generations, seized the cracks to strike back. What had once been an unbreakable wall, now shattered into 1,000 fragments. But the collapse was not only political, it was spiritual. When an empire centralizes faith in a single god, a single law, a single truth, its fall means more than the loss of kings. It means the death of an entire universe of beliefs. Suddenly, millions ask themselves, if the gods who promise us eternity could not save the empire, then what is truly sacred? The spiritual void opened the door to something unprecedented: doubt. And doubt is a dangerous seed. Philosophy, heresies, forbidden cults began to sprout from the ruins. The absolute order that had once controlled skies and hearts crumbled before the untamable force of human imagination. And here's the paradox. The more absolute the rise of an empire, the more devastating its fall. Libraries burned. Tablets were lost to dust. Science, once in service to the throne, scattered into fragments, carried by fugitives, rebels, and mercenaries. And so, the entire world was affected. Egypt, Anatolia, the lands of Levant, all felt the shock. The collapse of a united Mesopotamia was not the end of a civilization. It was the beginning of a void, An abyss where new empires, new religions, and new ideas would have to emerge to fill the space left by the fallen Colossus. But what rises from the ashes of an empire that believed itself eternal? What does humanity learn when it sees that not even the gods can protect the arrogance of man? The answer lies in the final chapter of this journey, a dark and inevitable conclusion, which you will witness in the next part. What if Mesopotamia had remained united? Perhaps the world would have known absolute power from the very cradle of history. Perhaps we would have lived under a single law, a single language, a single faith, an empire that controlled time, the skies, and even the human soul. But the lesson of this alternate universe is dark, because the greater the dream of eternity, the greater the void when it shatters. The collapse of a united Mesopotamia would not be merely the fall of cities. It would be the fall of the very idea of perfection. And here arises the inevitable reflection. Perhaps fragmentation, conflict, and even pain were necessary. It was a diversity of peoples, culture, and gods that allowed humanity to create different myths, varied philosophies, and plural religions. It was imperfection that gave us freedom. It was instability that opened space for imagination. If Mesopotamia had remained united, perhaps there would have been no Greece, no Rome, no Christianity or Islam. Perhaps there would have been no Renaissance, no revolutions, no democracies. Perhaps humanity would have lived in silence under the shadow of a single throne. This is the paradox of what if, in the pursuit of eternity, the empire would have erased precisely what makes us human, the ability to dissent, to dream, and to reinvent the world. And so, the echo of a united Mesopotamia remains only as a ghost, a warning hidden in pages that never existed. No power lasts forever, and perhaps it is this very fragility that keeps us alive. Now I ask you, what is more valuable, the eternal order of an empire or the creative chaos of human diversity? The answer is not found in history, but within you. If you have made it this far, you are already part of this journey between realities. And if you wish to continue exploring parallel universes where nothing is impossible, subscribe to the channel now. Here, every What If is a portal to a future that never was, but could have changed everything. Because history is not only what happened, it is also what almost happened, and what could have happened